Alrighty, hello everyone. So today we will be going over the list 1 section of the CodingBat practice. So once again, go ahead and head to codingbat.com and then go to the Python section. We have gone over warm-up 1, warm-up 2, string 1, and now we are going to be on list 1. So in list 1, as we can see, there are 12 total questions. So we're going to be going over a couple of the first questions in here. So if you have already done these questions, what you can do is you can just compare your answers with the ones that we have, or you can go ahead and kind of work on the next ones and check back later on in the lesson. But without further ado, I guess let's hop into the first question. So the first question is called first last 6. So I will let you guys read the directions, right? So try and look out for the keywords, and then go and look at the test cases and see if they kind of match what you think the question is asking of you. Okay, so I'm sure you guys have seen that this is going to be an array problem, right? So this is an array of ints, or an array of integers, or numbers. And so the two cases that we're going to be looking for are the returning true case and the returning false case. Now, we have multiple subcases for each of them, so let's look at the true. So return true if 6 appears as either the first or last element in the array. So this is the only situation in which we will be returning true, where if the first or last element in the array is a 6. Now, what this means is that if we have either a first or a last, or in the case that there is a first and a last as a 6, then it will always return true. But if there are no 6s in the first or last elements, then that means that we have to return false. And finally, the array will be length 1 or more, meaning that the first will not equal to the last element. So, first off, we know that this is going to be a function, and this is given to you first, last, 6. And the next thing that we need to look at is, well, we're going to be importing our through our parameter an array. So nums is going to be the name of our array. So in order for us to check the case that the first or last element is equal to 6, we need to see, well, what kind of how do we find out which one is the first and which one's the last elements? So the first element is going to be simply just nums and at the index of 0. Like that. So that's how we know, well, this is the index of 0. Now, the last index, what you can do is either you can just go like nums minus 1, meaning that it grabs it from the end rather than the beginning, or you can just do nums.length minus 1. But because we want this program to be shorter, all we need to do is just write minus 1. So kind of look at this and make sure you kind of understand what's going on over here. Alright, so now that you have understood that, well, this is how we find the first and last characters inside this array, now we can go ahead and look at, well, how do we check the case, right? So the case is going to be returning true if 6 appears as either of them. So we know that this means that if num0 is equal to 6, and we know that this means that if the last element is equal to 6. Now, the combined case is going to use the keyword or. And it's important we use or and not say like and, because If either one of them is equal to 6, we want it to return true. And finally, we need to think, well, how do we make sure that it returns true when one of these cases is filled? So let's think about that, and I'll show you the solution later. So I'm sure, as you guys have guessed, or rather thought of, the structure that we're going to use is going to be an if statement, right? So the if statement is simply just going to write if num0 is equal to 6 or nums -1 is equal to 6, then we return true. And now we think, well, now that we have the true case, what do we do about the other cases? So since these are the only cases in which it will return true, all we need to do is just write else return false. So if we were to run this right now, we would get all of it correct. Now, we can also see that maybe there's a way we can simplify this even more. Because, well, since this is an else statement, we don't actually need it. So we can just go ahead and delete it and remove this indent here, and it will still return true. So I want you guys to look over this and make sure you guys understand how this works. Alright, so now that you guys have had a good look at this, there's actually another way we can simplify this. Now, since this if statement is actually a very special type of if statement, there's a way we can make this a one-line kind of function. Now you may be wondering, well, what makes this if statement so special? Well, you see, in this if statement, there are only two lines that occur after the if. Return true and the assumed else, and return false, right? So you're like, okay, well, those just return Boolean values, so there shouldn't be anything too special. Well, since there are only these two lines of code here, that means that instead of having to write this if statement over here, what we can do is we can go ahead and directly return this. And the reason for this is because, well, this return statement is an if statement kind of built in, right? So it returns the value of num0 is equal to 6 or nums -1 is equal to 6, or the first or last value is equal to 6. And if you notice, the way we think about this is if the first or last value is equal to 6. And that's because, well, this return function automatically builds in that kind of if statement. And that's what makes this kind of if statement so special, because it can only return true or false. So let's go ahead and run it, and we can see that we get all of the cases correct. So now what I want you guys to do is kind of examine this one line of code and see how we were able to simplify it from 4 lines of code all the way down to 1. And then make sure you understand all the cases over here. So now that you guys have had some time to look at this, we are going to move on to the next question. So the next question is going to be same first last, right? So same first last. So I'll let you guys read over the instructions, and then as usual, try and identify the keywords, and then go ahead and go over these example cases yourself. Alrighty. So as you guys have seen, so this question is going to also give you an array of integers. So after you get this array of integers, it says return true if the array is length of 1 or more and the first and last elements are equal to each other. So we see these cases over here, and obviously you can kind of write them down. So now these problems are getting slightly more complicated, so it might help to get like a piece of extra paper to just kind of jot down, I guess, a tree or some sort of way to keep track of these cases. So as we can see that there's going to be two conditions in here. First of all, the array has to be of length 1 or more. And second of all, the first and last elements must be equal to each other. So first off, we're going to write the method, and so this is also going to be given to us as it is in every question. So it should look something like this. So define same first last. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to identify, well, how can we tell if the length is greater than 1, right? So the command for getting the length is going to be just len of nums. And since we want len of nums to be greater than 1, all we have to do is len of nums has to be greater than 1. And so we have a second condition, that the first and last elements must be equal to each other, right? So that means that nums at index 0, right, must be equal to nums at index of -1. So go ahead and look at this and make sure you kind of understand how this works, and then we'll go off from there. So now that you guys have understood these two conditions that we've set, now we can go ahead and actually start writing the real conditions in, I guess. So as you guys have probably guessed, we are going to be going ahead and using an if statement. So first off, we're going to test if the length of the array is indeed greater than 1. So we get that. And now that we know, okay, well, the length of the array is greater than 1, well, we want to go ahead and we're going to test, well, does the first term equal to the last term? So now that we get that, so this is going to be the only case in which it returns true. So all we're going to write is return true. So that is going to be the only case in which it returns true. And what we can do from here is we can just go ahead and write return false over here, because every single other case will result in a false. Forgot to write the else here, so oops, there we go. And we have to make sure that we go ahead and make sure that's greater than or equal to there. Oh, we have that colon there. So we can see that we have all of our cases here. We have one true case and we have these two falses and the elses. So we remember that we can just go ahead and we can just simplify this, and we can delete the elses, right? So just like that, and we can still get them all correct. And so this looks oddly familiar to the case that we saw in the previous question, in which we saw a true case and a false case. And yes, this is in fact one of those questions. Now, you may be wondering, well, instead of just one if statement with an or in it, now we have two if statements. Well, we gotta remember that this if statement can actually just be moved into the if statement above. And the reason for this is because all it is doing is essentially just sticking an and in between it. Because once it passes this case, it must go through this case as well. Which means that if either one of these cases returns false, then the overall solution will be false, as we can see. Now next is going to be, well, now that we kind of see this, we can just perform the exact same procedure we did last time. And so we can just delete these two lines. We can go here, and we can just return this. And we can get all of the cases correct. So I want you guys to examine this and think about what are the similarities and differences to the question we just did previously. And then I want you guys to make sure that you truly understand what is going on in here, and make sure you understand why all of these cases return what they do. Alright, so now that you guys understand this, I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys what the difference is between the first and second questions. Well, in the first question, essentially all it was an if statement that had an or in it, right? And we were able to simplify it into just a return statement with an or. Now, in the second question, all we did is an if statement with an and, which was then simplified into a return statement with an and. So this is quite big, as we're combining our knowledge of lists and the if or logic statements together, right? So now that we kind of understand this, we can move on to the next question. So the next question is going to be slightly more simple. So that is going to be make pi. So Daniel will be teaching this one, so I will share his screen. That should be here. Alright, go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, so this is make pi, and the directions are to return an integer array length 3 containing the first 3 digits of pi, 3, 1, and 4. And here we have made pi into 3, 1, and 4. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to think about what you guys might want to do. It might look a bit simple, but yeah. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make an array that has the 3 numbers 3, 1, and 4. So we're going to call this array pi, and we're going to give it the values 3, 1, and 4. And now this variable pi has these values. And it asks us to return this array. So all we have to do is write return pi after that. And that's it.
Alright, so that was make pi. So as you can see, that was a much simpler question, right? Alright, so that is taking advantage of kind of the being able to define your own array without any preset conditions. So that is also very important practice, although this was kind of a simpler practice of it. So I want you guys to make sure you guys kind of understand it, and so you guys can kind of make sure in the next questions, just go ahead and make sure you kind of practice it. So we're going to be doing one more question before we end the class for today, and that is going to be common end. So I want you guys to read over the instructions, find the keywords, and then go over all the cases you see over here. Alright, so we see, given two arrays of integers, a and b, return true if they have the same first element or they have the same last element. Both arrays will be length of 1 or more. Now, we can see, okay, we are now given not one, but two different arrays, right? So, we can think, alright, so how are we going to go ahead and tackle this question? So, first off, we got to define the method, common end, and we're going to be given two parameters, array A and array B. So we have these two lists, and we need to make sure, okay, the first element of A, whether or not it's equal to the first element of B, or if the first element, or the last element of A is equal to the last element of B. So in order for us to get the first and last elements of both of the arrays, we can remember that all we need to do is A0 and B0 and A -1 and B -1. So I'm sure you guys remember that's how we get the indexes. So now all we need to do is, since we are given that the first element is, if the first element is same, then it should return true. We can just write that equal sign, and we can do the exact same thing with the last element here. And then, since we know, well, this has to be run through an if statement, what we can do is we can run an if statement here. If the first element is equal, if the first element is equal, then we can return true. Else, if the last element is equal, then we can also return true. Else, we return false. Right? So, if we go ahead and run this, line 2, did I miss something? Oh, wait. Let us rewrite this. So, if A is equal to B, there, and if A is equal to B, and missing that. Alright. Always remember your colons is the lesson. So, as we can see, if either the first or last elements are equal, then we can get the correct cases. Now, as we remember, we don't have to have these else's, so we can just go ahead and delete these else's. Like that, and we can still get the cases all correct. And as we can see, well, it's still returning only Boolean, right? So that means that we must be able to simplify even further. So I'll let you guys think about that for a second, and I'll tell you guys the solution afterwards. Alrighty. So, now that we've gone over this, we can see, well, obviously, we can go ahead and just, instead of writing this if statement here, we can just go ahead and write a return statement, right? But then again, we see there's another return true, and we can see, well, we can actually further simplify this. So instead what we can do is we can go ahead and we can write an OR here. So if either one of these cases returns true, then the solution is true. And if both of them return false, then the solution is false. So this is very similar to the first question in that we use an OR when we return it. And we also remember that simplification can often there are many patterns that you can see in many of the problems. And in the problems that we are solving right now, the pattern is going to be when they return Boolean. And when they return Boolean, obviously we can see that we can just simplify it into a return statement. So I want you guys to make sure you guys understand the solution here and you understand all of the cases here. So now that you guys have had some good time to look at this, that kind of wraps up our class for today. So if you have any questions, go ahead and just put them in chat right now. And if you don't, then thank you everyone for watching. And I guess email us if you have any questions later on. And if you don't have any questions, then I guess look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you for watching.